Welcome to the Invested Dads Podcast, simplifying financial topics so that you can take action and make your financial situation better. Helping you to understand the current world of financial planning and investments, here are your hosts, Josh Robb and Austin Wilson.
All right. Hey, welcome back to the Invested Dads Podcast, a podcast where we take you on a journey to better your financial future. Today, we are going to be talking about pot stocks.
All right, this is going to be our highest episode ever, I think. No, wait,
it
pot
seems
stocks,
likely.
those aren't like cooking utensils. We are talking about marijuana.
Cast iron skillets.
Yes, marijuana stocks.
We are talking about marijuana stocks. Yes, you're exactly right. And this will be our highest episode in terms of episode numbers. So
Yes.
it's the latest one.
This is episode 420 for... No, it's not. No, it is a topic that has come up, and we're going to be breaking down first kind of the legalization of it, trying our best to stay out of politics, but just talking about the impact on that from an investor standpoint, and then talk about whether or not you should invest in it. But this has come up because as it has become more and more mainstream and more in the news, the conversation has come up as it becomes more likely that some form will be legalized. And some states and countries have started that process. And I say countries because Canada up north
right
of
across
us.
the border.
So it's been a conversation, so we thought we would address it.
Yeah. So the question is,
Yes.
it's illegal on a federal level, right?
Still is.
So
illegal.
why are we talking about this? Well, okay, let's just break this down because it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So yes, it's illegal on a federal level, marijuana, according to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA.
DEA.
And I'll link to one of their pages in the show notes, which breaks down the schedules. But marijuana is officially listed as a Schedule I drug at this point.
How many schedules are there?
There's like five.
Five, okay.
Yeah, there's like 5 schedules. So according to the DEA, a Schedule I drug has no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse, and also includes things like heroin, LSD, ecstasy, meth, and peyote, in
Wow.
addition to marijuana.
That's a big range of
I know it seems like some like really
intensity, yeah.
crazy drugs to
Yeah.
like,
heroin,
Native-
LSD,
but like then like Native American peyote.
peyote. Yep.
So
And marijuana.
very widespread things here, but the DEA itself is saying that marijuana has no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. So that is why they list it as a Schedule I. We're going to get to it later, but I think as recent as 2016, that Schedule I classification was put under scrutiny, and it actually remained. It was asked to be looked at again, and
they
it
left
stayed as a Schedule I at
Okay.
that point. But the Schedule I tag has not prevented many states from passing laws that enable at least some use of the substance.
So we have a federal law,
Yes.
and the states passing their own laws.
Yep.
So does that make it legal or illegal?
Yep.
Okay.
It sure does.
Clears that up.
So at a federal level, yeah, it remains illegal. But since states enforce their own narcotics statutes, there's a conflict between state and national legislation at that point. Like I said, as recent as 2016, that classification was challenged and rejected. One thing holding declassification back is the fact that the Food and Drug Administration, so the FDA, has not proven that it is scientifically and medically safe or effective. Or at least they haven't published any findings or research or studies that would say that. Whether they've done them or not, we really don't know.
Okay. So the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, if they came out with some sort of research that said, hey, marijuana helped or at least didn't hinder this, then that would at least maybe help
Yeah.
the process for the DEA to reconsider adjusting that classification.
Yeah,
Gotcha. Okay.
absolutely. And it is good to note that it has been illegal on a federal level since 1937. And in 1970, that was when the DEA schedules came out. And then at that point, it was listed as a Schedule I in 1970, which is, if you think about when that happened, that's like right at the end of the, hippie late
Yeah.
60s.
They said, look at all this crazy.
Oh, let's just make it illegal. So anyway,
So it was legal before 1937 or just...
it wasn't illegal. I guess that's a way to put it. There was no
one spent much
enforcement
time
of
on
it
Okay.
at that point. But that's just like, there are other things that were legal or just not illegal back then, like cocaine and all kinds of
They
crazy
just hadn't
things.
said anything about it, made a law about it. Gotcha.
Exactly. It hadn't become a problem is probably what happened.
Okay.
So let's talk about states. So we talked about this battle between the federal government and the states in terms of legislation. What's legal, what's not. So as of the summer of 2021, 19 states and districts, so the district being Washington, D.C., have officially voted to permit the legal recreational use of marijuana. Well, technically 20, because South Dakota's vote in 2020 was overturned by a circuit court ruling, and it's still under appeal. But 19/20 states have, or districts, if you include Washington, D.C., which we'll get to, have voted that into full statewide legality of recreational use. So let's break down the states and the timeline. In 2012, Colorado and Washington made marijuana. Washington State made marijuana recreationally legal in the state. In 2014, Alaska, Oregon, and Washington, D.C. made it illegal for recreational use. In 2016, California,
Washington, D.C., my history / government understanding of how everything works is Washington, D.C., they're not all federally regulated?
Correct.
They have their own.
It's not a state, but it is a state.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So they do their thing.
They do their own thing.
They don't have any elected people, and
I think there's like a mayor and.
But like for like Senate and
correct.
The House,
they do not have representation
there. Okay, but they can pass their own little laws.
That's a whole other topic for another day because that's been discussed widely as well. Yeah. But yes, Washington D.C. It is.
They can legalize marijuana.
It is legalized that you can recreationally use marijuana. So if you question what your elected representatives are doing, sometimes that could be the reason.
There you go.
2016, California, Maine, Massachusetts, and Nevada. 2018, Michigan, Vermont. Illinois made it legal in 2019. Now, here's the ticker here. Arizona, Montana, and New Jersey made recreational marijuana legal in 2020, followed by New York, Virginia, New Mexico, and Connecticut in 2021. So, in total, and based on 2019 population estimates, about 40% of Americans, so not quite half, but 40% of Americans live in a jurisdiction where marijuana is legal for recreational use.
And that was 2019. So all those after Arizona, Montana, which hardly anybody lives in there, New York, New Jersey,
those are big.
Populated, Virginia, New Mexico, and Connecticut. So that's probably 40%.
Getting close to that 50, who knows. So that's big. Additionally, 37 states and territories have approved marijuana for medical use. 37. So that's a lot more than the 20.
Yes.
I'm not going to go through that list. But if you want to go through that list and you're curious, I'll link a great little resource from ballotpedia.org, which has a good graphic you can check out. Link that in the show notes below. But based on 2019 estimates, again, kind of the most recent data we've got there, 67.5% of Americans live in a jurisdiction with access to medicinal marijuana.
And my guess is
that's higher as well.
Up. Yeah.
So notice that there were 7 states that legalized marijuana for recreational use since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh, yes.
So I guess that would mean that they placed a high priority on it.
You've been waiting for that one, haven't you?
So let's talk about support levels. Because obviously we elect officials to put laws through that represent us as Americans. But you would think that if the vast majority of people support something, it will at least get discussed as a potential for legislation.
Yep.
So let's talk about support levels. 12% of adults supported legalization in 1969. 12% of adults. This steadily increased. I'm talking every single measured period that they did a measure.
What percent of adults went to Woodstock in 1969? About 12%?
About 12%,
okay,
yeah.
Just checking.
So this steadily increased to 66% in 2019. 12% to 66% throughout those 50-some years.
Yep.
With older adults being less likely than younger adults to support throughout that data period. So the older you are, the less, statistically speaking, support you had for legalized recreational support of marijuana. When we look at it by political affiliation, there is a difference. 73% of Democrats support recreational legalization compared to only 40% for Republicans. So that's a big gap.
Swing. Big difference between those.
When it concerns medicinal marijuana, 96% of Democrats support it and 86% of Republicans. So
that's a lot closer between those two.
Yeah, that's a lot closer. So when it comes to medicinal, I don't think as people have as much of a problem as when it comes to recreational there.
Yeah, but as of right now, the FDA has not found any or released any research that's shown a positive correlation there.
Okay. Yes. So, legislation. We talked about how, generally speaking, we're electing people that we expect to bring things that matter to the people as a whole to law. That's kind of what we do. So based on the support levels, with a higher percentage of supporters being Democrats of recreational marijuana specifically, and factoring in the blue legislative and executive branches of the federal government, it would be easy to expect some formal discussion anyway about this between now and the next midterms in 2022.
They don't like to talk about during the midterms, though.
No. Avoid controversy.
Yes.
Maybe they'll wait till after that, depending on how. Let's look at how close the polls are and decide whether we're going to talk about this. But nothing firm as of now. Obviously, our legislators have a lot on their plate.
It's not an infrastructure bill?
It's not an infrastructure bill. They wanted to push that through first.
Okay.
To my knowledge, there's not a ton of line items for marijuana in the infrastructure bill. There's a lot of other things.
That's not it.
So, Josh.
Yes.
I think one of the things that prompted this episode idea was that you found a funny
dad joke.
So let's have dad joke of the week, and I have a couple for you.
All right, we're going to get a couple of these. How do fish get high?
I don't know.
Seaweed.
Oh, man.
I know. It's funny.
Okay.
It's simple,
You
funny.
wait. Okay.
Okay.
This is more of a statement.
Okay.
I just spent my life savings on a cannabis farm. The estate agent assured me it's a growth industry. Okay. This is why I chuckled at your joke. What kind of cannabis does a mermaid smoke?
Oh, boy.
Seaweed.
Seaweed. Same thing. Just any animal,
Anything.
any sea creature.
It's just seaweed.
Seaweed.
So, Josh, kind of break down a little bit. Let's go pros and cons, like why some people think that we should not, as a country, legalize recreational marijuana. And let's talk then flip side of that, why some people think that we should.
Okay. So let's start with the argument against legalization. So people that don't think we should legalize or continue how we are with it being illegal. The addictive nature of marijuana. So some people believe the addictive nature in that if you legalize it, that could lead to higher costs of treatment for people in the drug addiction. They also believe that it could be a gateway drug towards other drugs. So if you experiment with marijuana, you could have a higher chance of trying other drugs all the way down to cocaine, heroin, opioids, all that stuff. And then similar to smoking, you're inhaling smoke, that there are some health effects, lung cancer, a lot of cardiovascular diseases that could be a result of inhaling smoke, whether it's from a cigarette or marijuana. And then there's the mental health issue. That part of it is just because it's been illegal, there's not been a lot of research and studying on the impacts, long-term impacts on some of this stuff.
And that's probably part of the reason that there are these thoughts against it is because no one has published, not no one, the FDA specifically, hasn't published any research on this. So these things, whether they're true or not, have not been refuted or disputed. It's just kind of opinion over time at this point. So flip the page.
Flip-flop. So people who say...
this is a good thing. They're going to say, let's legalize it.
Yep. So the people arguing for the legalization, well, if you legalize it, chances are you're going to have some sort of tax on it.
High tax?
Very high tax. You're going to get new revenue. So state, local governments could, and we've seen that with some of the states that are legalizing either for medicinal or for recreational use, they have seen an increase in revenue collection from taxes. Alcohol, tobacco, the sin tax is kind of what it's referenced, is some of those things that fall into that category. They have a higher tax and people accept or pay that higher tax on certain products like that. If you legalize it, that actually eases the enforcement burden for law enforcement and that side of things. Our court system, our law enforcement officers, there's a lot of time taken up for marijuana, and if you legalize it, a lot of that would be adjusted. Now, there's one thing, this is not a for or against, but what if you are put in jail for marijuana possession and then they legalize it later? Like, do you get a get out of jail card?
Right.
Or do you...
and that's one of the debates because there are probably thousands of people who have some sort of infraction
or
leading back to that.
Or there's a piece of it,
where it could impact them. I think I read that in 2018, out of the 10 million arrests in the U.S., over 1 million were drug-related, okay? Marijuana was the largest portion of all drug-related offenses at that point. So if you maybe reduce that as being an issue, then you free up your officers to focus on more serious and maybe violent crimes, sex trafficking, child this and that. These are obviously everything's real, but these are some of these are life and death situations that you can then allocate more resources to.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
And then finally, along with all that, if you legalize it, it will probably be studied more. It could have a higher safety because once the government gets involved, regulations, rules. I mean, you think of alcohol as a good example. There's a minimum drinking age. There are limits to what you can do if you have consumed, the level that you can have in your system before it's considered illegal to drive and those type of things. So with regulation, maybe would make a little higher safety around that use right now.
And I think that the component, the actual drug itself, if it's legal and you're regulating the use of it and regulating how it's made and produced and the ingredients and all of this stuff, that could have less harmful additives. If you bought it off the street, you don't know what's in it. And if it's legal, then you at least have some control over what's in it there. So, potential for increased safety there.
Yeah. So, for and against, we're talking about arguments, right?
Right.
There's a moral aspect of it too, kind of where you stand on, even, again, if you lump in other types of those type of products that where you feel that makes sense or not. But from a high level, those are kind of the main arguments you see people put out there for and against. And then let's talk investing then, because wherever you fall on that scale, as of right now, there are ways you can invest in this industry. There are ways, if you wanted to, you could find companies here in the U.S. and, like I mentioned, globally, where if you wanted to invest and you could participate. So what are some of those? And what do you got?
Right. Some of the companies that if you watch the news, the CNBC, Business News, anything like that, some of the cannabis-related companies that may pop up are companies like Tilray, ticker TLRY, Canopy Growth Corporation, ticker CGC, Aurora Cannabis Inc., that's ACB. Those are if you're looking individual companies there. Not saying those are recommendations, saying do your own research, but those are just some names in the trend that are investable assets.
Speaking of names.
I love names.
Speaking of names,
you got a thing for tickers.
I love a good ticker that matches where you're going with your investing. So I bet you there's some ETFs out there with some good tickers.
And we like our ETF tickers. So let's talk about some ETFs. So these are exchange-traded funds. These are different than mutual funds. And again, we're always going to say it, but if you want to learn about the difference, we have an episode where we're dedicated to discussing that. We're not going to talk about it today. But ETF, exchange-traded fund that you can invest in this theme is the Amplify Seymour Cannabis ETF. Ticker, CNBS.
And Seymour is not, I want to Seymour Cannabis. It's SEYMOUR. So, yeah.
Exactly. Another one is the Advisor Shares Pure Cannabis ETF, as opposed to the not pure one. And the ticker is YOLO.
YOLO.
Another one is the just straight up cannabis ETF. Ticker, THCX.
There you go.
And one more, and Josh's favorite, the ETF MG Alternative Harvest ETF. Ticker, MJ.
I mean, they're creative.
That's good.
They're on it.
Someone paid big money for MJ as their ticker.
And YOLO. YOLO is still out there. I mean, skydiving, publicly traded skydiving ETF.
So let's flip the page to mutual funds, because you can also invest in mutual funds. There's an American Growth Cannabis Fund. And does not have a great ticker.
Well, they always have to.
Because mutual funds just typically don't have good tickers anyway. And this ticker is AMREX. So there are options out there. Again, not recommendations, but there are options to invest in this space.
Yes.
It's a growth space.
You like that. That's apparently what your joke tells us.
That was my joke. So let's talk about performance, okay? Let's specifically talk about these ETFs that we talked about. I'm going to preface this by saying we don't have a long track record. These companies have not been public very long, so therefore the ETFs that hold them have not been available very long. So CNBS, which is the Amplify Seymour Cannabis ETF, that is up 1.5% over the past 2 years.
Woohoo!
Now, the SPY, so the Spider S&P 500 ETF, is up 55% over the same time.
Yeah.
It's been a bumpy ride. Over 1 year, however, so going back 1 year, the CNBS ETF is up 43% versus 30% for the SPY.
Okay.
So it's bumpy, is what we're gathering
volatility.
there.
New industries tend to be that way.
So let's talk about YOLO. YOLO is up less than 1% over the past 2 years. And over 1 year, it's up 41%. THCX is down 24% over the past 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Down 24%. Over 1 year, it's up 44%.
There you go.
And MJ, Best Ticker Award.
Yes.
It's down 32% over the past 2 years, and over 1 year up 30%.
So, like a lot of the market, it's over the last 1 year. I mean, we're talking the recovery time for the whole market. So, in line,
and a lot of that had
volatile.
to do with the election changed some of people's views on these companies, because as the election leaned more blue over more time, especially into January, right, as we had the runoffs in Georgia, that made people think that these would have been a better option than they were previously because of the opportunity of that being on the legislative agenda. So, Josh, as we know, the question always is, we know we can, but should we invest in pot stocks?
Well, I usually say it depends, and I'm going to say that again, but there's an extra added piece to this.
Yeah.
Normally it depends on your situation, your goals, your risk tolerance, and all that still applies. But the added piece to that is, it is still illegal federally. And so from a moral standpoint, how do you feel investing in an industry that has been deemed to be federally illegal? Although some states, again, like we talked about, have legalized it within their state. So that's one more aspect to consider when you think about investing in this area. So as always, talk to your advisor. Make sure you have a very good conversation on what that means, what the tax impact would be, any ramifications. If you don't have an advisor, you can give us a call. We'd be happy to help talk with you about how we do investing. But, this is one of those a lot stickier of a situation than, when we talked about what utilities or anything like that. It's
right.
There's another aspect added on top of why or why not if you should be into this type of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, great answer, Josh. 2 reminders as we wrap up this episode. Number 1, it's not too late to enter our second half stock draft competition. You'll start with a fresh 100,000 fake dollars and be competing with the rest of us all the way through the end of the year. You can actually enter all the way up to the end of the year, and hey, who knows what will happen?
Yeah,
it's anyone's game.
Good idea.
Yeah, it's anyone's game at this point. Number 2, as always, check out our free gift to you. It's a brief list of 8 principles of timeless investing. These are overarching investment themes meant to keep on track to meet your long-term goals. And no, we don't specifically talk about pot stocks, but check that out. It's free on our website. Josh, how can people help us grow this podcast?
Yeah, make sure you subscribe. That way you can always get our most recent episodes downloaded straight to whatever device you use to listen to podcasts. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you have any questions about what we talked about today, want some clarification, or have a great topic you'd love to hear us talk about, shoot us an email at hello@theinvesteddads.com. And then if you know somebody talking about this topic, share this episode, and hopefully it will inform them, give them some more things to think about.
That's right. Well, until next Thursday, have a great week.
Yep. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Invested Dads podcast. This episode has ended, but your journey towards a better financial future doesn't have to. Head over to theinvesteddads.com to access all the links and resources mentioned in today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and we had a positive impact on your life, leave us a review, click subscribe, and don't miss the next episode. Josh Robb and Austin Wilson work for Hicks & Zerker Capital Management. All opinions expressed by Josh, Austin, or any podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Hicks & Zerker Capital Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Hicks & Zerker Capital Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast. There is no guarantee that the statements, opinions, or forecasts provided herein will prove to be correct. Past performance may not be indicative of future results. Indices are not available for direct investment. Any investor who attempts to mimic the performance of an index would incur fees and expenses which would reduce returns. Securities investing involves risk, including the potential for loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment plan or strategy will be successful.